as I was saying, my grandpa was really into the idea of the guy from Buckminster Fuller that, reality is an anti-entropic reordering function. And, so long as you're in synergy with the energy multiplying, evolutionary activities of the universe, then, things will be good. And that's a part of the flow. So my grandpa moved me away from believing in Darwinism. When I was a leftist, I believed in Darwinism and I was against religion. But my grandpa was like, no, it's not Darwinism. It's, anti-entropic reordering function. Like the reason why the lion kills the lion cubs of the male who's weaker is because, he has more synergy, and that increases the synergy of life. But my grandpa would be, talk about software, but at the time I didn't understand software. I'll get more to that later. But so my grandpa started making me more right wing because his whole thing of like anti-entropic reordering function, work, synergy. And I was thinking like, okay, that's like, hard work. That's working hard. And that's like a right wing type of thing, like work hard and just go all out. And as I said, like one of his big things was like he liked the movie Forrest Gump. And in Forrest Gump, Forrest runs everywhere, right? So my grandpa's like, yeah, that's a part of the flow. You just got to run everywhere and be like Forrest Gump and, go all out. And that's a part of, expanding your awareness and making yourself, transcending the self and not being lazy. Just go all out and run everywhere. Be like Forrest Gump. So again, to me, that's more like right wing. Like, when I was a left winger, left wing was like more hippie, like, how there's like the stereotype of black people being more lazy and just kicking back. And when I was with my friend Noah, who I always felt was more leftist and, more like hippie-ish, right? He's always like, he tried to be more like black, right? Like, oh, who cares about time? Like, I once said something like, why, hurry up. I don't want to waste time. He's like, why do you use the metaphor of wasting time as if, time is something like a commodity? And, why don't we just be in the flow and just relax and just chill out? And, my grandpa would say that's a hippie mentality, and that's not really the flow because that's still self-confirmatory and it's lazy, which is self-confirmatory. So my grandpa was moving me away from that communist leftist mode of being like hippie, like, like Noah was like, society is corrupt and, all these jobs are, they're just to maintain the status quo, and a lot of them, like, all the fast food industry, it's about torturing animals, and he wanted to destroy society. He wanted society to go down. Anti-society, anti-white man, right? And that's the way that I kind of was, right? When I was a leftist communist, I wanted to see society crumble, and seeing people smoke weed and being lazy, it's like I always took the leftist way of looking at things, like, yeah, like, don't make drugs illegal. And the hippies who were smoking weed, they were actually the good guys because they were going against the military industrial complex United States colonizer white people, and I was on this, like when I would talk to my friend Noah, who was a communist. This is when I was a communist most of my life. I'd be like, yeah, Noah was like, yeah, part of the reason why the Vietnam War was to send all the hippies over to the war to die and the black people to die. And, and it wasn't really against, and he was a communist, so he wanted communism to win. And he was like, if it wasn't for the communism being sabotaged, it would have done well. And, a lot of people say, well, communism doesn't work, but no, it's just because the West and the capitalists sabotaged it. And that's the way I wanted to be. Because I was an anti-white communist, leftist. But then, my grandpa's making me more right-wing. So he's talking about, yeah, no, working hard's important. And that's a part of synergy. And that's a part of, but my grandpa would admit, like, software is an aspect. So, like, you wouldn't want to be in a job, for instance, like pornography, that would be, self-confirmatory and predator-prey oriented and preying on women and stuff like that, because that would be a narrowing of consciousness. But my grandpa would say, like, there's always concessions, but regardless, working hard and being a part of the synergy of the universe and the anti-entropic reordering function of life, working against the entropy of the universe, because the universe is moving toward entropy, but life is in counterbalance to that. And so he's making me more right-wing, right? And like, be like Forrest Gump and just run and just go all out. So I'm like, okay, so I'm becoming more right-wing. And like another example of something that was making me more right-wing was he was like, yeah, because like I asked him, like, what do you think about like the colonization and like, the Europeans trying to make everybody Christian? And my grandpa's like, yeah, well, there's a higher aspiration, and that's to bring about oneness. And, the idea that there's make everybody Christian, there is one flow, there is one truth, and to make everybody Christian, the aspiration behind that aberration is to create oneness. But when I heard oneness before, I'd think of that as like, well, that's, that when you say oneness, doesn't that mean like let's all mix and let's all race mix and, anti-white? That's the way I always was my whole life. Now I know my grandpa, when he's talking about the flow, wasn't talking about race mixing. But when I was a leftist, I didn't understand him. When he's talking about race mixing, he didn't explain things well. So he just confused me all the time. But, now I understand the flow is, transcendence of dualistic software. And, again, when I was a leftist, I was like, yeah, dualistic software, transcendent. Let's all mix. Let's all, race mixing, But now, that was when I was leftist. But now I have, and I'll get to how I started discovering this when I read Dr. Horace's books in like 2021 and stuff, or 2020. But, at that time I was like, yeah, when I was a communist, I was like, yeah, that's race mixing. But no, now I understand dualistic software would be transcending like, superior, inferior software and toward like, the truth, to see things as they really are, right? And transcending the ego. But I'll have to get to that more later. But it doesn't require race mixing and taking down borders and stuff. If you're in the flow, you can acknowledge when borders are okay to have and stuff like that, right? And again, like my grandpa said, everybody's one, but not everybody's the same. So like there's toe cells and there's heart cells and there's brain cells, and the heart cells don't mix with the brain cells, and so this is moving more toward nationalism, toward right wing orientation. Now, at this time too, I was hanging out with my uncle a little bit, and my uncle was very into QAnon. So this is like 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, up to 2020. And my uncle was very into QAnon, and that's like a right-wing orientation thing. And this is my grandpa's son. And he's like, and my grandpa's son, he was seemed to be against the race mixing, but he was very like, he was very into QAnon. He's like, yeah, and he would talk about how the Jews don't like white people and stuff like that, and the whole race mixing stuff. And like, he liked it when there was one biker gang, they fought another biker gang. They were like a white biker gang fighting like a more like Mexican biker gang or whatever. And my uncle was like, he didn't like Mexican people. He didn't like, because he thought that there was like a race, an anti-white agenda mainly catapulted by Jews. And that's the way that my uncle saw things. This is my grandpa's son. So and this is also what, reinforced why I always thought that my grandpa was a white supremacist. Because I was like, well, yeah, you're a white supremacist probably, because your son's a white supremacist, and you seem to have right-wing orientation views and stuff. So like I said before, when I was like a left-winger, I would be, against colonization. But now I would try to justify it, like my grandpa said, like, well, there's a higher aspiration behind colonization. And that's the desire for oneness, and that there is, in the realization that there is one truth. And, and my grandpa would say it could ultimately bring about, cooperation, which is still dualistic, he would say, because when you cooperate, you still believe there's a self in others. But he would say ultimately mutual participation, which is like a oneness consciousness where you're mutually participating in the larger projects and creative projects, which takes you out of the self, right, to transcend the self. But anyways, my uncle was basically a white supremacist right winger, and he was talking about like, I would go to visit my grandpa, and my uncle would be living with him. My uncle would go back and forth to living with my grandpa, and living probably in a trailer or something. I don't know where he was staying at. I think he lived in a trailer. And so, my uncle lived with my grandpa his whole life pretty much. And he used drugs when he was really little. Like when he was 11, he was like a drug addict and an alcoholic, right? For his whole life. And so he lived with my grandpa pretty much all the time. So when I would be talking with my uncle, my uncle would be like, he'd be saying how that there's a cabal, and he would be talking about how the Jews and the Italians, he would talk about the Catholics and the Italians. See, my uncle would see himself as German, and he thought that there was like a Jewish Italian cabal of like more brown skinned people who don't like white people, and they want to mix white people and destroy white people and destroy Germany and destroy basically the Europeans. And he said there's a lot of it, mainly Jews, but also there's Italians in it, and the Catholic Italians and stuff, and Jesuits, and it's basically like a Nazi. My uncle is basically pretty much a Nazi, right? So I'm talking to my uncle about this stuff, but he's trying to explain this stuff. But I remember when I was a communist, I hated my uncle. But now I'm starting to kind of understand. But at the same time, I don't like how he's against Jews, because I still do see myself as Jewish. But now I see myself more as a right winger, so I'm becoming more right winger. And I'm like, well, yeah, there are good Jews. There's Orthodox Jews who are not for race mixing. They're not leftist communists. So that's the way I'm trying to look at things now. And so I went from being like a leftist communist Jew to seeing myself more as a right wing, a right wing Jew, right? More like Orthodox. Even though at the time, like, I wasn't necessarily following the Orthodox way and stuff, but I basically became more of a right winger. So my uncle's telling me about this stuff, and then my uncle, though, he was like, my uncle was suspicious of me, and he was going a little bit crazy. So my uncle was like, maybe you're a part of the cabal, with your quadrant model stuff. Like, you went to that fancy Harvard Westlake school. That's like a cabal school. A lot of Jews there. That's like the cabal type of stuff. And I'm like, no, dude, trust me. Like, I discovered the quadrant model on my own, and I really did. Like, and I'm not a part of any cabal. I'm not a part of any conspiracy. Trust me. But my uncle was like, he's a little bit crazy, right? He's a little bit on edge with this stuff, but he's very, and then so my uncle was talking about, like, there's a big octopus, like he would use Nazi language, right? Like the octopus, and they're controlling everything, and it's mainly the Jews type of thing. But he wouldn't outright say the Jews a lot, because he knew that I saw myself as Jewish, right? So he'd be like, yeah, well, there's a big octopus controlling the world, and then I ended up getting in a fight with my uncle because he was kind of getting on my nerves, and but I was like, dude. And I told him, like, dude, you're just a Nazi, dude. You're just basically like, QAnon. That's all just Nazi stuff, this right-wing Nazi stuff. But the thing was, I was a right-winger at this point. But I didn't like the anti-Jewish part of the right-wing stuff, even though I realized, like, the Jews were, I didn't know it to the extent that I do now, but, like, I did recognize that the Jews tended to be leftist and tended to be anti-white, and I recognized that, but I didn't like the anti-Jewish stuff because I saw myself as Jewish, right? So my uncle was moving me more toward right wing, and my grandpa, like, my grandpa's teaching me about the anti-entropic rewarding function, right? So, but this is an interesting thing, was, like, I remember one time my uncle was talking about, like, what was it? Oh yeah, my grandpa would watch CNN, but my uncle was really into Fox News, and my uncle would be like, yo, CNN is the cabal news, because it's like Jewish, right? Like, it's the cabal news, and it's just that the whole race mixing, like, anti-white, anti-German type of thing, right? So my uncle was like, he didn't like CNN and everything, and also my uncle didn't like the celebrities, like the Jewish celebrities, like the movie stars and stuff. So and I think about it, a lot of it is because he saw them as Jewish, and he saw them as, like, anti-white, and part of the Hollywood anti-white Satanist communist agenda, right? And I described, I would discover later that, Satan in Hindu mythology, he's on the Dravidian side, and he's a Shiva worshiper, and he's on the Dravidian darker race side, and he's against the Aryan light race people. But when I was a communist, and he's a Satanist, and he's a communist. Satan's a communist in the Hindu mythology. His name is Shukracharya. He's the planet Venus, and that's the morning star, right? But when I was a communist, now I recognize I was a Satanist, and I was anti-white. But then, so my uncle, though, he's like, he didn't like the whole Hollywood people, and he was like, they're evil and stuff. But my grandpa starts confusing me, though. So my grandpa, I like I said, he was moving me more toward right wing, but I'm starting to get confused because my grandpa's like, see, my grandpa, I always see him as, like, he's a victim blamer, but also like a victor extoller. So my grandpa's like, well, so like the rich Hollywood people, my grandpa's like, well, no, my uncle's like, they're evil, but my grandpa's like, no, they tend to be higher functioning, and that's why they make a lot of money. But my uncle's like, no, they make a lot of money because they sold themselves out to Satan, So again, like, my grandpa tended to, like, he always tended to be, like, on the a victim blamer and a victor extoller. So, like, the celebrities are rich, but so my grandpa's like, yeah, well, because they're higher functioning and they work hard and they go all out, they're like Forrest Gump, and they tend to be higher functioning. But my uncle, though, he was more like, no, they're, because they sold out to Satan, and they're part of the communist cabal, Illuminati agenda, So at this point, I'm starting to, I'm a little bit confused, but I'm moving toward right wing again. Like I said, I was a communist my whole life. Then I became a right winger in, like, 2014. Then I became communist again, and then I became a right winger again. And this is, like, 2016 to 2019. So, so I'm trying to learn more from my grandpa, and I'm trying to understand the flow stuff. Like, what is the flow? I'm trying to understand what his teachings are. But I remember at one point, so my grandpa, he was upset because I didn't have a job, and he's all into this thing like, anti-entropic rewarding function. Everything is an anti-entropic rewarding function, and you have to be in synergy, and so you should get a job and then increase your competence and increase your synergy, and then you'll be a part of the anti-entropic rewarding functioning of the universe. So, I remember I went, he was starting to, bother me with that, and his whole thing about like make me independent. So one thing he did was he was like, well, one thing you have to do, Ryan, is you have to let go of your stories. You have to let go of your stories. And he's like, your stories about the past, like, and then the thing was, because he's like, if you're in the flow, you're just in the now, and you don't have stories. So, but I was, when I was a leftist, and when he would say this, like, it made me think, like, again, like, this is a right wing orientation, like, his whole thing, like, let go of stories, let go of the past. And I always thought that was like a right wing thing, like, that white people would do to black people, like, let go of the past, just let go of it and just, go, just be in the flow, just go all out, just let go of the past. Why you have the victim mentality? Why are you stuck in the past? Just let go. And it's like, well, the past does have repercussions and consequences in the future, and you have to acknowledge that. And I think that my grandpa would even acknowledge that. And even later, I would talk to my grandpa and I would ask him about like REPM therapy, where people would do like rapid eye movement therapy, and they would go into past traumas. And my grandpa was like, I was like, well, is that not the flow? Because you talk about in the flow, you're in the moment. And my grandpa was like, well, sometimes that can be beneficial. It can be beneficial sometimes to talk about the past so that you can work through it and then let it go so you can be in the moment. So, there isn't any hard line formula for the flow, as he would say, right? And sometimes going into the past can be essential. But again, he's talking about like, Ryan, let go of your stories, because I was writing my books and I was talking about how my grandpa, how my family wouldn't talk to me and, all the negative stuff, right? But my grandpa was like, just, let go of your stories and just be in the moment, be in the now, be like Forrest Gump and just go all out. But then I asked my grandpa, my grandpa would watch basketball and he'd watch, Steph Curry make all those threes. And in my mind, I'm like, I was better than Steph Curry. People would laugh. Haha, that's funny. People don't know how freaking good I was when I was younger. I was making 7 3-pointers a game at times, playing with South Coast, the best team in the country. I was a big time player, playing with the best teams in the country, a starter the whole time. And I was a very good player until the shoot-away machine messed it up. And that was around the 7th grade, I got the shoot-away machine. Going into the 7th grade is when I got the shoot-away machine, and that's when it messed it up. And I can go into details about that. But like I said, my grandpa didn't believe me about that. My grandpa's like, well, if you're in the flow, the shoot-away machine shouldn't have done anything. You would still, because he didn't understand. He doesn't understand that the reason why good shooters are good shooters is the way they move into it, the way they step into it, and that type of thing. And you can't do that with the shoot-away machine. It messes it up. So, but my grandpa, again, like, he seemed like a victim blamer, and like, well, if you were in the flow, like, trying to blame me for my shot getting messed up. And that's why I feel like he also encouraged my family to alienate me and to isolate me. And so I was upset about that. And I really do think that he did a terrible job, So I think that he also made me crazy. He screwed up my mind. He did a lot of horrible things, right? So, at this point I was just like, but my grandpa's like, just let go of stories, right? And just be in the flow. And then the other thing was, like, I remember, so we got in an argument and I was telling him, like, it's basically the same argument every time. Like, I want to talk to my mom and dad. I want to see my mom and dad. And my grandpa's like, well, you're not ready. Your software's not high enough. And, he didn't believe me about the shoot-away machine and, all this stuff. So we got another argument. My grandpa was like, okay, I don't want to teach you anymore. So he stopped teaching me again. But I wanted to, he didn't teach me about the flow at this point, and I still was confused. And he didn't teach me well. So, like, now, again, he left me out to dry again. So I wanted him to keep teaching me, but he's like, I'm not interested anymore. And he's like, I'm just meditating now. So now he would just meditate. He's like, I'm not interested in thinking anymore. And now I understand what he's talking about, transcending thinking so he can get into the flow. So you just meditate so he can transcend thinking, because thinking is related to the ego. And he's trying to have inspiration consciousness, right? But at that time, I didn't understand it. So he's just like, I just feel like he's just letting me out to dry. He's like, I just want to meditate, and, I'm not interested anymore. So he left me out to dry, and now I'm just confused because he didn't teach me about the flow yet. And at that point, I was just confused. He didn't teach me well. So I'm like, so things were just terrible at that point, and now he's not teaching me. And, yeah, so, and then I'll get to more what happened more later. But I remember, like, at one time we went to, I went out to eat with my grandma and grandpa. He wouldn't teach me anymore, but he went to eat out with me one time at a restaurant. And at the restaurant, he had his dog with him, his dogs. And then he was like, he said something about, you know, earlier that day, my grandma gave me some money, and my grandpa was like, "Don't give him money, Gloria." You know, he said that's enabling him. He's like, my grandpa was like, you know, giving him handouts is enabling him. And I was like, you know, my grandma always wanted to give me money. She always wanted to help me. And like I said, my whole life, my family always helped me. My mom and dad did everything with me. They did everything for me, you know? And then my grandpa's now, he's trying to be like, make Ryan independent, because then he'll transcend ally enemy software and he could be in the flow and, you know, all that type of stuff. But really, I needed help. I needed support, and that would have helped me to become independent. And that was what I said too when I was watching the basketball. And he's like, wow, aren't they amazing? And I was like, no, they're not that amazing. Like, I was a better shooter than all those guys. And, you know, and my grandpa was like, aren't they amazing? And I was like, well, so I told my grandpa, like, well, grandpa, you know, if I was, you know, if they would have, if my mom and dad could have just talked to me and helped me get basketball videos of when I was younger, and all that crazy stuff wouldn't have happened in Kauai. Like I said, all that crazy stuff happened because I was trying to get basketball videos, and I didn't have any support from my family. My dad wasn't talking to me. My mom wasn't talking to me. I was afraid to ask people for videos because, you know, one, my swag flow was off at the time. I'm not going to get into details about that. But the other thing was, like, I just wanted videos, but I was afraid that people would say no. So I wanted to get power first so I can get the videos. And I was telling my grandpa, if you guys would have just helped me, if, you know, you wouldn't have done all this, like, no talk about the past stuff and all the stuff that alienated me and isolated me from my parents, make Ryan independent, then I would have gotten the basketball videos. And if I would have had the basketball videos, it would have helped me so much. It was only until 2019 that I started fixing my shot. But I didn't know I could even fix my shot. But if I had more basketball videos, I probably would have fixed it earlier, because I would have been studying better, because I would have more material to study. But, you know, watching the videos, it helps me so much. It fixed up my stuff, and I did moves that nobody does because I was unconscious. That's why I was so good, and I want to study what I did. And if I had basketball videos when I was younger, I would get to the next level. I would have been a huge basketball player. I would have been really big. It would have helped me so much. But I didn't have a lot of videos, and that hurt me. And I was like, if you guys would have just helped me, it would have helped a lot. And then I would have been in synergy. So I was like, well, you know, are these basketball players, the NBA players, are they in synergy like you talk about? Are they a part of the anti-entropic rotary function? He's like, yes. So I was like, well, you keep on telling me that you want me to get a job or be a part of the synergy. Well, if you guys would have just helped me, I would be right now. I would be playing basketball, making rap music, because I can only make rap music when I'm playing basketball. I would have been doing poetry. I would have been in the synergy and stuff. But his whole, like, trying to make Ryan independent, trying to force things and he screwed things up so bad. So I'm trying to tell him that. So then we got in an argument, and then he stopped teaching me again. So that's when he stopped teaching me again. He was like, I'm not interested in teaching you anymore. So again, like, then he leaves me out to dry. He's doing all this stuff. And a part of the thing that pissed me off about that was I felt like he was trying to, like, justify my dad's not talking to me. Like, you know, your dad doesn't talk to you because of your software, and I don't talk to you because of your software. And it's all your fault. And, you know, because you're not in the flow, you know. And I felt like I really started to hate my grandpa, you know. So I felt like he screwed things up so bad. So I'll get more into this in next lectures.